pass those out in a minute. This was one of those mornings where I don't know what I'm doing. We're just running around crazy. It was hard to get everybody in the car. I was actually the last one in the car, so it's my fault, I guess. So those will be coming around in a minute. And while we're waiting on that, one of the Rocky boys, will one of you lead a prayer? No? Evan, where? You can pass it off, just giving you the opportunity. Okay, thank you.
Heavenly Father, we come to you this morning with thanks in our hearts. Thank you for allowing us the opportunity to come together this morning and study your word, be with each other as a family. Please be with those teaching and help them to teach us in a way that we understand and we can use it in our daily lives. Be with all those who are learning and help us to understand as well. We do this in your son's name. Amen.
Amen, thank you. Okay, so let's get open to Matthew chapter 6. That's where we're going to be continuing. Still the Sermon on the Mount. I looked, so I have a little table to keep me on schedule of where we should be, and we are over halfway through with class. It doesn't feel like we should be. Maybe it does to you, I don't know. But it seems like it's going quickly to me. So we're in Matthew chapter 6, and we had covered the ideas of, practicing personal righteousness, or sometimes we use the word piety, so our personal sort of spiritual practices and different things that we use to relate to God and to be faithful to his righteousness, things like that. And what we're going to start today is down at verse 19 through the end of the chapter. So this is another section here that Jesus starts. And so this sheet that's being passed out that covers this section, we're going to spend the next 3 class periods doing that. So we'll have 3 class periods on this section and on the sheet. And this is it's a pretty famous section. I feel like maybe it's a little more famous than the first part of chapter 6 with respect to everything but the Lord's Prayer, of course. But this is one that we know. And I think maybe where, at least it's been lacking in terms of where I've read it and tried to study it before, or where I've heard it before, is really not linking it in the context of what Jesus is talking about here. So, what we're going to do today really is focus on the first part, verses 19 through 24, and it'll continue in the next class also. But 19 through 24 is where Jesus is laying a lot of the groundwork, or really the principles about what he's talking about. And then starting in verse 25, it's a lot more of the illustrations or the applications of this. So if all of what I've just said is true, then what is this going to look like in your lives? And so we'll spend more time on 19 through 24 because that's Jesus really laying out the principles here. So going down to this, can I get a volunteer to read Matthew 6, 19 through 24? Matthew 6, 19 through 24. That you guys did at the same time, so. Angie, yeah, go ahead.
Do not lay up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust destroy, and where thieves break in and steal. But lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where neither moth nor rust destroys, and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. The eye is the lamp of the body. So if your eye is healthy, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eye is bad, your whole body will be full of darkness. If then the light in you is darkness, how great is the darkness? No one can serve 2 masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and money.
Okay, thanks. So this will be the first half that we focus on today. So we've talked about sort of the personal, internal things with the earlier part of chapter 6 of trying to do charitable works, of praying to God, of forgiving people, of fasting, so sort of those internally focused things. And now it seems, if you're going through this, the question arises, well, what about the rest of my life? What about my job and trying to provide for my family, and what my goals and what I see my mission is in the rest of my life? Because there's a lot of other things going on besides just praying and fasting in our lives, right? So this is really about a lot of the rest of it. Where's my focus? Where's my attention? What are my priorities? And this is what we're talking about here. And so really I think this is, how should the kingdom of heaven affect where I put my attention and my effort and my focus, right? So this is what we've been talking about, that this is the kingdom of heaven breaking into our lives and changing the way that things are, or at least it should be. So, okay, this kingdom that you're talking about, Jesus, I'm entering into that. So how is this going to affect the way that I see my purpose in life? What I'm supposed to be focusing on, where I'm putting my time and my effort. And what I really want us to understand is that through this, Jesus is making a very strong contrast between heaven and earth. So two different localities. You might use different words, so heavenly things and earthly things, but there's this battle, this struggle, this contrast between things that are here and things that are up there. And that is where a lot of the struggle is. And you can kind of picture it, if we're kind of in the middle, being pulled both ways by each of our arms by all of this. So obviously, the kingdom is trying to demand something from us, but then we're also being pulled by the world and its values and its systems of being and things. So going into this, 19 through 24, I think really we can ask the question, where is your heart at? Where's your heart at? So this is what Jesus is considering us, or asking us to consider. And so he starts in verse 19 saying, do not lay up for yourselves treasures on earth, or you might have store up treasures on earth. And then in verse 20 he'll say, but lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven. So what does it mean to lay up treasures or store up treasures? We've heard that, but what does that mean? Chet?
I think it means where we're putting our priorities, either to serve God or serve the world.
Yeah.
I don't want to brag or anything, but at Cummins, when I worked there 33 years, I had two supervisors that come up to me and said, where do you go to church? Said, you do your job to the benefit of the company rather than for self-pity.
Yeah. Yeah. Where are the priorities? How does that affect how I'm doing the rest of my life? So priorities, what maybe would somebody else say? What does it mean to lay up or store up treasures? Grace.
You could look at it in a literal physical sense of at least earthly treasures, of accumulating stuff. A lot of people get really caught up in the idea of having all the new stuff, everything that's available out there. And so accumulating stuff could be the way of accumulating or storing up treasures for ourselves on earth. Obviously, from a spiritual sense, it would have to look different than that.
Yeah.
But, you could literally look at it physically from the standpoint of storing stuff.
Yeah, and so we've used the word every so often of materialism for that. So that was a concern for them. It's also a concern for us, materialism. Josh, you had your hand up?
It makes me think of the word like invest, because you're focusing on the longer term, and you're not just focusing like monetarily. It takes your time, your effort, different things like that. So I think, where are you long term focusing on in more than just a monetary way?
Yeah, invest I think is a good word. And because that conveys a lot more than just spending time, right? There's effort, there's mental effort behind all that. So just think about Jesus' actual imagery that he's talking about. So laying up or storing treasures. So for them, that would look a little different probably than us, right? So Jesus will sometimes use the illustration of like a barn, something, and somebody's trying to throw all their things in the barn and store up for a rainy day. What do you think that would actually look like for them, though, to be storing up treasures on earth in their day? Because we think stuff, right? They didn't have nearly as much stuff the way that we think about it as we do now. So what did that look like for them? Yeah.
Maybe it could be stuff they need to survive,
Such as what? Stuff they need to survive. So,
like wool and things like that, stuff that they would make with their hands. that
Yeah.
would be more, I guess, meaningful in a way, because they had to do everything themselves. They couldn't just go to the store
yeah.
and buy 20 blankets. They had to make them.
I think so. Haley brings up a good point of when they were accumulating things, it took a lot more of their time because they had to make it all, right? They had to make it. A lot of it they used for survival. We literally can push a button and it's at our house the next day. So it's a little bit different. So you can see, I think, a lot of where Jesus is talking to them about don't be putting all your effort into this, because they had to procure the source material, whether that's going out and shearing the sheep or going to, the city square and the markets and everything. And they had to make all the things, and they used it to survive. It's a little bit different for us, but you see the seriousness where Jesus is talking about your time and your effort and your intentionality with all of that. We got Jim and then Margaret.
If we live for eternity, we will secure what is needed in time. Psalm 37:25, and David said, I've been young, now I'm old, yet have I not seen the righteous forsaken nor seed begging bread.
Right, yeah. And that's what Jesus draws us to at the end, right? Of God is going to take care of you if you trust him and follow his way. Okay, so for them, Margaret, I almost forgot you, sorry.
Okay, I just think, when you think about storing up, I think about the man who was very prosperous and he tore down his barns. And
That's what I was thinking of,
bigger
yeah.
barns.
Mhm.
And to me, that's the laying up of treasures on earth, and you know how he was resulting.
Yeah, absolutely. So one thing that we've talked about, Ashley, did you have your hand up? Because I'm about to move a little bit different direction, so, yeah, go ahead.
I was just thinking about when Andy Cantrell was talking about the gentleman who did the Kingdom Fund, and that's kind of what I think is like, it can be material stuff, but like being generous with it and giving it away because it's just stuff. Like
Yeah.
we can't take it with us, and so.
Yeah, absolutely. And so we think about this, all of the different things. Who does Jesus have in the background from everything that we've been talking about with the sermon? Who's he kind of talking about, sort of lurking in the background? Think of chapter 5, verse 20.
The Pharisees.
The Pharisees, right? So how would maybe this have to do with the Pharisees? Brace?
I don't know about the Pharisees specifically, but from what I've read.
Their whole group, yeah.
Specifically were some of the wealthiest people among the Jewish people.
Yeah.
And probably got that way because they hoarded up stuff and accumulated for themselves treasures on earth. So, at least from what I know, historically, the Sadducees were people who were very materially focused.
Yes. And I was just thinking of a verse because I realized I had not written that down. But in Luke, I believe it's Luke 6, and I can't find it right now, so maybe somebody can find it for us later. It mentions the fact that they were lovers of money. And I might have the wrong address there. But the Sadducees especially, because they were really the politically connected ones, right? And so they got a lot of, we might say, like kickbacks and things because of that. But also the Pharisees, with what Jesus is talking about, think of chapter 23. They love to have the places of honor, and they want to be the honored guests, and they want everyone to say, "Hey, teacher," in the squares. And when Jesus is, throwing out the money changers in the temple, who are the ones that really get angry about that? It's the scribes and the Pharisees and the Sadducees. And when you look at it historically, it's because those were actually sort of their side businesses. They were the ones getting a lot of the funds from that. So I want us to understand that when Jesus is talking about this, and he's saying don't store up treasures on earth, it's because the people that they're looking toward as their teachers and their examples were doing this exact thing. And there was the idea that if I do what God wants, then he's going to bless me materially. He's going to make me rich. We have some of that in our country. They had that for sure of, if you think about it, Jesus says, it's harder for a rich man to enter the kingdom of heaven than for a camel to go through the eye of the needle. And they say, well, who on earth then can get into heaven? Because they thought, if you're wealthy, that means God's happy with you. And I sometimes talk to my sister-in-law who's from Kenya, and in Africa they have that idea also, that if you do what God wants, he's going to make you wealthy. And we don't have that as explicitly, but it is lurking in the background of if I do everything that God wants, then he's going to make my life easy and prosperous. And so they're looking at the scribes and the Pharisees and the Sadducees and thinking, well, then I need to be pursuing these kinds of things too because I want to be like them. Because that's who God's pleased with, and they're wealthy and they're doing well. And so I want us to have that in the background of we're not just talking about, random sort of things, but this is connecting to their everyday lives here. So Jesus says, do not lay up treasures on earth, but store up treasures in heaven. And the image in my head kept coming back to those of you maybe who have like a special collection. You probably have like a spot in your house, or you have even a special room, right? Where you take all of your very precious things and you kind of store them up, and they're there secure and away from anybody else that might touch them or break them or things. And that's sort of what we're talking about. The effort of procuring these things and then putting them in their special place, right, and storing them up for a rainy day. And it's not talking about collections, but it's that same sort of attitude, right, of putting all of that time and effort and care and affection into stuff, essentially. Materialism, wealth, all of those. So looking at number 2, what are the 2 reasons that Jesus gives for why not to store up treasures on earth? So I do think there are 2 reasons here. The first one's going to be in verse 19, and the second one is going to be in verse 21. Because I know you haven't had time to look at this. So what are the 2 reasons Jesus says not to store up treasures on earth? The moth and the rust. So it's going to waste away and be destroyed. So those of you who maybe collect old things, right? Antiques or something. They don't look the same as they did when they were first made. Or money, it can grow mold, and it can, all kinds of things. Silver and gold can tarnish, all of that. And so we understand rust destroys, if you have fine clothing or materials or that, a moth can get in and eat holes through it, all of those things. That's specifically what Jesus is talking about. Do we really think of it in the same way? That moth and rust and thieves can get in and take our things? Because not many of us are keeping our savings in the mattress anymore. Some of us might be. And if you are, don't tell anybody. So not all of us are keeping our things in the mattress, but we have them in the banks or in the stock market or all that. Do we really feel like those things can be touched by moth and rust? Or does that provide some kind of false security? Joyce.
That goes with the next part of that verse, where thieves break through and steal. And I'm reaching a point where if I go off and forget to like my garage, the first thing I think of when I remember is I hope somebody breaks in and takes everything else out.
Yeah. Yeah. I think in our modern lives, we have a false sense of security about our stuff that they didn't have, right? In their mud houses, mud brick houses, it took a second for someone to come in and wipe out your entire life. And we think that it's all hidden away and it's safe because we don't keep a lot of our wealth in the house. Maybe you have things that you collect, or you do have some physical objects and things. But think about the 1920s and 30s, well, the 1930s. Think about 2008, right? Where overnight, our sense of security can be completely wiped out because we think that it's safe because nobody can come in and steal it. But you know overnight that that can absolutely change, and that is sort of a reality check. Or Salem and I were actually listening to a podcast when we were driving, and this person was talking about their friend who's in finance. And these scammers came up with a really ingenious plan, and even though this guy was in finance and deals with fraud and all kinds of things all the time, within, I think it was 15 minutes, had access to all of his bank accounts and investment accounts, and we're about ready to wipe out everything he has. And so that's a reality. If you're putting all your time and effort and affection into all of that, and then somebody breaks in and steals it all, how's that going to affect you? You know, Shepard worries a lot about, well, what if our house catches on fire? He has a thing about natural disasters. What if our house catches on fire and all of my toys get burned up? And we tried to talk to him about, yeah, that would probably be really sad, but it's just stuff, bud. But a lot of us, I think, are more like the child. You know, I think about, well, right now my laptop is getting extremely old and it's not working. I've had it for over 10 years, which is an odd thing now. And so I have to think about it, and I think about the fact of, you know, do I really need this? Because there's a part of me that's like, oh, I have to have this personal computer thing. I mean, I could go to the library and I could do all kinds of stuff, right? The reality is that I would be much less effective in what I'm trying to do if I didn't have that. But this idea that we feel like we can't live without things, stuff, and the commercials and the marketing and all that is really, really good at making us feel that way. You know, every so often I'll get an email and it's, you know, these are the 10 things that I found in the last 6 months I can't live without. And it's just random things. And I find, well, I got to figure out what that is because maybe I'm missing something. But so we need to understand that just because we don't have a pile of gold in our house like they did, does not mean that it's untouchable. Because our modern lives give us a false sense of security about all that. Got Jim and then Aaron.
Someone said if we're selfish and we take and not give, then the weak get beaten and the strong do the eating.
The weak get beaten and the strong do the eating. Yeah. Okay. Aaron.
As you look through Scripture, do you see the discussion, do you see even the concept of retirement? You know, work and put away, that way when you get old, you don't have to work. You just sit around and let your money pay. I don't see that.
I don't either.
And
Yeah.
I mean, they were communal living, and they lived very much, you know, short-term supply. And we live in a culture where, you know, we're taught from the time we're young, invest because it will grow, and then you can retire. And there's a movement now, you know, save a lot and retire early. To where, I mean, a lot of the younger your generation are looking, how can I retire at 50?
Yeah, because I don't want to work anymore.
Yeah, I don't want to work anymore. And again, there's nothing inherently wrong. I mean, Proverb talks about the wise man, you know, saved for his children's children. He provides an inheritance for them. So, you know, money is amoral. Zach and I were talking about this Friday night. Money is amoral. It makes you more of who you are. If you're generous, money makes you more generous. If you're a miser and selfish, it makes you more of that. And so this comes down to, if you're focused, again, it says don't lay up here on earth. And how many times have we taken something we're like, I might need that someday. So we put it in the garage.
Yeah.
Then 12 years later, we throw it away because it is now,
Or you don't throw it away.
or
There's
you
that
don't.
option.
And it just, that bicycle that you had since, your 30-year-old was 6, has now, it's so rusty it won't even operate.
Yeah. Salem.
This kind of makes me think of, you'll know what I'm talking about, but we watched the TV show Alone.
Oh, yeah.
There was a season where this guy caught like 20-some fish, but then still lost the game because he was starving, because he wasn't eating it, which I think he just had gone a little crazy from, being alone for so long. But I think that's something that we can do where we're putting all this effort into storing things away and saving and, at least just focusing on that even mentally, where we're starving ourselves spiritually because we're not putting our focus where it should be.
Yeah. So for those maybe that didn't hear Salem, we're big outdoorsy people, and I've done some, wilderness survival kind of things. And we watched the show Alone, where they dump a bunch of people out, and it's either last man standing or whoever can go the longest kind of thing. I think they're allowed to bring 10 things. And there was a guy who had like 2 months worth of fish stored up, but he was starving to death. And they pulled him out because he was starving, because he was afraid to eat the food because he thought he would run out. And so it's that you could make an analogy out of that, of put all this effort into things and we can still be starving because our heart's not in the right place. And that will bring us into the second of the 2 reasons that Jesus is talking about. So according to verse 21, what's the other reason that we should not store up treasure on earth?
We store up treasure, it shows where our heart is rather than wanting towards God.
Yeah, where your treasure is, that is where your heart will be. Notice, too, that is an absolute statement. Jesus doesn't talk about that as a possibility. He says, where your treasure is, that is where your heart is going to be. And we can sometimes think of exceptions and things. But the idea is generally, wherever we're putting all of our attention and our effort and our affection, it's going to anchor our hearts there. So if that's in heaven, then our hearts will be anchored in heaven. If that's here, accumulating material wealth and experiences and status and all that, that's where our heart's going to be anchored. Zach.
That's kind of where my mind went to when you asked the question earlier, like with this, time frame, where were they storing their treasures in because they didn't have as much as we do. That's kind of my mind went to, maybe their heart is really just stored more in the world than it is with their relationship with God and their destiny of heaven with Him. And I think, at the end of the day, we can relate that to ourselves now is, are we more concerned with just the life here on earth, or are we more concerned on how this life on earth is going to transform us into what we're meant to be?
Yeah, absolutely. And there's different reasons that they can happen. So for them, they're worried about survival. They have to procure and make all their food. A lot of them had to make their own clothing. They're oppressed by a world power, right? And so their focus and concern in anchoring their hearts here on earth was because they were trying to survive. But for us, it's not really about survival. It's about comfort and convenience, right? We get focused here on earth because we want to be comfortable all the time and we want to have things easy and we feel like we're entitled to certain things. And so instead of thinking, well, if I don't do this, then my family's not going to eat tomorrow, it's about, well, I don't want to be uncomfortable and I don't want this to go poorly and I don't want this to be hard. And, well, if I don't have this thing, then I'm going to be behind. And it's a different mindset that ends up in the same spot. It ends up in having our being settled here, and that's where our focus is. Did somebody have their hand up? I kind of went on a little thing there. Jeff.
I was just thinking about contentment. You talked about comfort and things, and how Rockefeller, when they asked him how much money is enough money, he said just a little bit more.
Yeah.
And that can be, we can get into that mindset too. I mean, we think, well, we need this amount of money to be comfortable with. We come to that amount, we have that amount in savings, and then we think, this amount. Get that amount, we think we need this amount. So
Yeah.
just a little bit more.
Yeah. So I think Salem and I are relatively good at budgeting with money and things, but I've definitely felt that of, we have this goal of, emergency fund or whatever, and you hit it and then it's like, I might need a little more in that emergency fund because, what if I have to give up this thing in an emergency? And so let's just tack on more. And then once you get to there, it's like, well, I also don't want to be without this, so maybe I need to put more on there. And so I think we're all susceptible to that. Joy?
I like the way that the word treasure means more than just money.
Yeah.
It could also mean if you value knowledge or prestige or
Yeah.
education or other people, any of those things can be your treasure, and then you can say, oh, well, it's not mine though.
Yeah.
Treasure includes that.
I think that's why Jesus uses this. So it's talking about the world, the earth, and it's not just the people, and it's not just the things. It's the world really as like a system or a package of kind of the opposite of heaven, right? So it doesn't have God's values, and it operates with a now focus instead of a heavenly, eternal focus, right? And it's not just about money and possessions, but, if I just want to pursue education all the time because it makes me look smart and I can achieve things through that and, acquire status, that's the same kind of thing. Or, plug in whatever it is that you want to use to further yourself here. That is really what we're talking about, treasures. And so we talked about number 3 of, according to Jesus, what's the danger with trying to pursue material wealth is that it roots our heart here. And that, again, that's not a if. Jesus says that is what's going to happen. If we put our effort and our focus and our priorities on things that are here, whether that's money or material possessions or knowledge or status, experiences, the people, I have some relatives who just travel the globe all the time, constantly. The idea of like a rambling man in some of those older songs. And you kind of see, what are you looking for out there? You're in Bangkok this day, and then you're in Peru this day, and what exactly are you looking for? And they're not storing up money in the same sense, but they are storing up treasures for a certain reason. So we have to understand, that it's a lot more than just money. So I think we need to understand that verse 21 is sort of kind of the center of this section that we're talking about. So Jesus talks about, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this, because this is what it's going to do to your heart. And then when we get to verse 22, it seems as though he's moving on to something new, but he's not. He's not moving on to something new at all. So verse 22 through 23 is still completely connected to what we've been talking about, and verse 21 is sort of the jump between the two. And so we can get here to verse 22. The eye is the lamp of the body. So if your eye is healthy, your whole body will be full of light. But if your eye is bad, your whole body will be full of darkness. If then the light in you is darkness, how great is that darkness? So it might seem that has nothing to do with what we're talking about. But if you think about focus and priorities and where your heart is, what you are striving for, and you understand that the eye is kind of what drives us and leads us around, you can see that Jesus is talking about the same thing but using a different illustration. So what exactly does he mean by the eye is the lamp of the body? Anyone care to take a stab at that? We don't really think about it in those terms, but what does it mean that the eye is the lamp of the body? Here.
When you look at the culture, lamps to them were really important. I mean, to us, I mean, you think about a lamp, and I mean, that's not really that important to us, but I mean, for us, think about if you're out in the middle of the wilderness, a flashlight is really vital to you. And so in their world, a lamp would light up their whole room and provide them light. To where the same fact that our eye is a lamp to our body. It allows in the things that influence us. The Hebrew writer talks about, running your race and keeping your eye on the prize. Why? Because that keeps you focused. You said earlier, I mean, it's about your focus. And so your light, that's how your eye, that's how a lot of what influences us comes into our life. And so when your eye is good and when your eye is focused on the right things, it helps your body to be good. It helps you to do the right things. But when it's focused on the wrong things, it just drives you off path.
Yeah. So when you're talking about that, I actually thought of that phrase, the eye is the window to the soul. Right? We don't want to push that too far, obviously. But the idea that our eyes have that, primary place in who we are, and you think the eye is the window to the soul, you go through the eyes, you get to the soul, right? And that's sort of what Jesus is talking about, is that is kind of the door into us. So Aaron talked about what the eye is letting in, and that's the idea, that the eye is allowing either light or darkness into the body. And we're not trying to get scientific with it. I remember when I was younger and I tried to draw a diagram of all of this, and I thought I had it nailed down. And now looking back, I'm like, that was pretty dumb. I missed the whole thing as a result of that. So this is sort of the window into our souls that Jesus is talking about. They talked about it in terms of lamp. And we sometimes talk about this concept in a little bit different way with another L word, and I think that is lens. So have you ever heard of the idea of the lens that you view the world through, or what kind of colored glasses you have on? I think it's the same sort of way. So if we view things through a certain lens, then what comes into us is everything that's filtered by that lens. They didn't really have the lenses at the time, so Jesus didn't use that as an illustration. But I think the principle is the same, that is what we are going to filter everything through, what's going to come into us. And so that can be either light or it can be darkness. So number 4 here, looking at what Jesus has been talking about, remember, this is not just moving on to something new. We're talking about the same thing. Looking at what Jesus has been talking about, what is the darkness that might fill us in verse 23? Say that again? Anything that's not towards the Lord. Yeah, I think that's really kind of the general thing, is it's saying that darkness is what is opposed to God. It's separate from God. And that is kind of the light and darkness contrast here. What in particular might Jesus be talking about with that? What have we been talking about in the previous paragraphs?
Yeah, I mean, John, I think, makes this point in 1 John chapter 2 as well, maybe based on what Jesus says here. And the idea is that a love of the world,
Yeah.
love of the things of the world, worldliness, materialism, all of those things are things that are, in this illustration, darkness. We're allowing darkness to come in instead of light.
Yeah. So the idea of light in all of this, right, this is the gospel of the kingdom, right? And so the light would be God's light, the light of the kingdom, those things. Darkness, as Haley was pointing out, would be what is godless, against God and his kingdom. And in particular, as we've been talking about, it's a world focus. Materialism, possessions, status, prestige, all of those. It's a darkness that is against God, and in particular, it is having our hearts anchored in the world here. Ashley.
I don't even think it needs to be what is opposed to God, but just what is other than God. And what I mean by that is, God instituted things like government and stuff like that. But if you are stuck in invested and,
Yep.
you know, all of that, like, that's a problem, you know? Like, yes, we have government for reasons and everything, but if you are just sucked into what is going on in politics and stuff, that's an issue.
Yeah, I think that's where we need to understand when the Bible is talking about the world, it's not just people, right? It's not just stuff. It's what's behind all of that. So values and powers and systems and all of those things that are kind of controlling and influencing the world. And so it's not, we're not talking about, oh, everybody that's walking down the street that's not in this building, they're the world and they're evil and against God and darkness. That's not. It is the world as a package, really. Yeah, that these are things that will put us in opposition to God, set us up against God. Because remember, we're talking about that being pulled two different directions. And Jesus is saying, you can't ride the fence. You can't. You can't straddle the line and be half in here and half in here. It's impossible. And we'll get to that more explicitly later. But again, light and dark, you can't really mix those because it's either light or it's not. And think about space in those terms. If there's not light there, it's a complete empty vacuum, and that's really the idea. Any other thoughts on what this darkness that might fill us, Jesus is talking about? Joy.
I can just say a little bit more about the wealth thingy. I just happened to look up Proverbs 20:15. It's verse 22 and 28. A stingy man hastens after wealth and does not know that poverty will come upon him.
Yeah. And that might not happen in his lifetime. So it's talking about a spiritual reality, right? He might not lose all of his stuff here in the sort of temporal, time-bound realm. But at some point, if he's put all of his focus into things, experiences, stuff, he is going to be poverty-stricken. Yeah, Brace.
Your passage you were looking for earlier, you were just missing a 1, it's Luke 16.
16. I knew there was a 6 in there somewhere.
You're right.
Okay. All right, so we'll pick up with number 5 on Wednesday, and that's going to get us more into a lot of the personal application of these things.